Hi, and welcome to episode 2 of Kronos Talks. In the last episode, we talked about debt and compared it to a fire, how it's dangerous, but it can also be used as a tool. In this episode, we'll look at some of the things that people often borrow money for and categorize them in 3 areas. First area is investing. People do borrow money to invest. But the second is speculating. And people don't really like to admit it to themselves, but maybe when you borrow money to invest, you're actually just speculating on what might happen in a market. And then the third area, of course, is consuming. A lot of people borrow money simply to have something for themselves. So without further ado, let's get started. So this is the Venn diagram that I put together. There's 3 circles on the screen here, and when we drop something in a circle, that means it falls in that category. But they're overlapping. This is the power of a Venn diagram, which means you can put something in 2 circles at the same time. The first thing I want to talk about is vacation, which is a terrible, terrible thing, a harebrained idea to go into debt for. The reason is people go on vacation in order to reduce their stress, calm down, unwind. But debt has the opposite effect on your life. If you're in debt, you feel more stressed, you're more panicked, your blood pressure is higher. So actually, I would say that you'll end up more stressed out if you borrow money to go on vacation than if you just didn't do anything at all. But vacation is definitely a consumption because when you're done, you've consumed the money and it's used up. So that's definitely an easy one to categorize. Vacation goes in consume. The next one, stocks. I consider this to be like a broader range of activities. I mean, whether you're day trading stocks or longer term, whether you're doing commodities or cryptocurrencies, I personally am a fan of Bitcoin. I would call all of these speculations, even just buying some stable company like some index fund. The reason is we're looking at this chart in terms of borrowing money to purchase. So this is, would people borrow money to take a vacation? Would people borrow money to buy stocks? In that case, you could see how it is speculation, because if the value goes up, you'll be able to pay off that debt and have a profit. But if it goes down, you're even further in debt. So even though stocks are not a speculation if you're using your own money, if you think about it from a borrowing perspective, you could definitely see how that's speculating. The next area is for a house. This is a very, very common thing that people borrow money for. In fact, it's very typical where I live to borrow money. It's called getting a mortgage when you purchase your house. But I like to split this out into 2 categories. The first is a basic house, which meets your basic needs. And this is different for everybody. If you have a big family, you need more space. And if you're just living by yourself, you need less space. But I would say that borrowing money for a basic house is an investment. And the reason is everybody needs somewhere to live. So it's not like you can just go without a house in order to save money. I mean, you have to live somewhere. You're either going to be pay rent to live somewhere or you're going to live in a house. I suppose you could live under a bridge somewhere, but I really don't consider that as a possibility unless perhaps I already am. But hopefully we won't end up in that situation. A higher end house, we'll call it a fancy house, is not an investment in my opinion. It's definitely a consumption because you're buying more than you need. But also, and this is something that people don't realize, it's also a speculation. Here's why. That extra money that you're putting into the house, people say, oh, you should buy more because then when it goes up in value, you'll own a more valuable house. That's true if it goes up in value, but houses can go up and down in value. So that extra amount that you're spending on yourself, you're consuming that money and you're also just hoping that it goes up in value. If you take a large mortgage for a fancy house and then it goes down in value, you can really find yourself literally underwater. It's called underwater if you owe more money than the house is actually worth. So you'll be literally and figuratively underwater if your fancy house loses value. So I'd put that in this category down here with speculate that the value will go up, and consuming because it's more than you need. When you have a house, you have to pay the property tax, you have to maintain the thing. There's 100 different small costs that you don't think about when you're first purchasing it, but they come up later. So by minimizing what you need to the basics with the basic house, you'll actually end up saving money. So that's why I'm putting that in the invest category. But a higher end home definitely is more of a speculation or a consumption. The next topic, school, is definitely a hot button. School debt is a huge thing in my country, in the United States. There's just ballooning student debt. And you know, it's kind of a tricky thing because people go to school for different things. And I consider this to be an investment or a consumption depending on what you're using the school for. Let's say you're studying a degree that will really increase your economic output, like engineering or accounting, something that there's a lot of demand for, and there's good paying jobs in that industry. In that case, you're investing in your future because you're investing in your future income. But some degrees really don't increase your earning potential. And this is unfortunately truer than you might think. I think a lot of degrees out there are not going to increase your earning potential really at all. And I'm thinking, for example, like an art degree or a history degree, or even worse, an art history degree, where, you know, even though you're an expert in history, that's not really going to help you serve coffee to overweight and obese Americans, which really is the coffee industry, right? Okay, I didn't mean that. So whether school is an investment or a consumption is based on what you're studying and what your plans are. So I'm going to drop it in both, but it's really a spectrum. Going to school for the experience is definitely a form of consumption, but going to school to increase your skills so that you can get a good paying job is definitely an investment. So I see it as some of each, just depending on exactly what you're studying and why. The next item, car, is also very, very common where I'm from. People borrow cars, or rather borrow money to buy cars. And most people say you need a car in order to get a job, in order to get around. Everybody needs a car. Now, it depends on where you live. Some people who live in big cities can take public transit and get where they need to go. But most people, you know, around here are like, well, it's a basic necessity. So you'd call it an investment, but it's not an investment. Here's why. There's only one thing that a car can do, and that is cost money and lose value. Cars do not increase in value like a house might. Cars do not maintain themselves. They always cost money. So they're also not that expensive compared to a house. You usually have to borrow money to buy a house. You do not usually have to borrow money to buy a car. For example, my car cost about 1 month's salary when I purchased it. And I got it used. I actually bought it off of Craigslist, which is a market for used goods. Didn't even buy it from a dealer. I saved money that way as well. So if you're borrowing money to buy a car, you probably, and by that I mean definitely, don't need to be doing that. Now, of course, you think you're the one exception. Why, of course, you need this certain car that costs more money than you have. But really, I would see a car as a consumption, simply because this is something that people borrow money for, but they don't need to. You can always get a simpler, lower end car. People make arguments like, oh, if I get that car, it's always going to break down and cost me more in the long run. That's probably not even true. And even if it is, there are other options. So it's better not to borrow money for a car, even though most people do. So that's tip number 1 on Kronos Talks. The next thing to talk about here, real estate, is real estate that's giving a source of income, like a rental house or a duplex or an apartment complex, or even commercial real estate. These are investments because they do give money back. However, the value of the investment can really change from day to day. I mean, your house could lose 20% of its value over a year or over a couple of years, and that can take away all of your rental income and then some. So it's also definitely a speculation, because you're hoping that the value of what you purchased maintains its value and increases in value. And that's not always true. Some people think that real estate only goes up, but I think recent history has shown us that that is not always true. Now, it's interesting to note that the perspective changes whether you're using your own money to invest or whether you're borrowing. Because if you borrow most of the money and then you purchase real estate with it, and then it goes down, you're underwater, it's very risky. But if you just used your own money to invest, I would see that as more of an investment, because if the value goes down, you're not in trouble. You can still collect rents from the structure and you're not at risk of losing it. So this speculate to invest spectrum is really changes if you're using your own money or whether you're borrowing money. So for example, stocks here, if you're borrowing money to purchase, it's definitely speculation. But if you're just purchasing stocks with your own money, perhaps in an IRA to invest for the future, that's an investment. So it's definitely changes whether or not you're using your own money. Now, of course, what you're wondering is what goes in the middle. And here is something that I consider would go in the middle. Starting your own business. That can definitely be an investment, but it's definitely a speculation too, because you just don't know if that business is going to be successful. But it's a consumption, and this is something interesting that not enough people think about who are thinking about starting businesses. When you start a business, it's typically something that you're passionate about in an area or an industry that you really love. Because who wants to start a business with something that they just can't stand, right? People always choose to start a business about something that they enjoy doing. And that's where that's a consumption that people don't really realize, is that you love doing this. And so in a way, you're doing it for yourself. And so you're personally benefiting from starting that business. And I would call that rosy glasses thinking, where you're just way too optimistic because you just think things are going to go great because you want them to go great. And so if you're going to start your own business, I would highly recommend talking to someone in the industry, perhaps who owns their business in that industry, or talk to people who have had some experience, because people are generally much too optimistic about businesses that they start, which is why most businesses fail when they get started. So that's why it's in the consumption range as well. I would think of starting a business as mostly investing and maybe some speculating, but it really depends on the business. And actually, most people who do this end up in the consumption sphere simply because they're doing it for themselves as well. So this is my Venn diagram of borrowing. I would say that if it's in the green circle, real estate, a house, school, or a business, you should maybe consider borrowing money for these things, but definitely talk with people who have done that kind of thing to get, feedback from someone more experienced. If it's not in the green circle, like stocks or high-end home or going on vacation, then flat out do not. You'll simply make your life worse by purchasing something on credit. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't buy these things. It's not saying you should never go on vacation. I'm simply saying don't spend other people's money to do that. Save up the money first and then buy those things. They're good things to buy, but if you pay for them before you can even pay for them, if you know what I mean, then you're only making your life harder. Well, I hope you enjoyed that Venn diagram. In the next episode, we're going to talk about purchasing a car specifically, because I put car squarely in the consume category, which is the red, bad, don't borrow for this category, even though so many people do borrow money to buy a car. So we're going to go more in depth on that so that I get a chance to defend my position before you walk all over me. If you do disagree about some of the things I put in some of the areas, definitely I want to hear about that right in the comments below the video so that we can have some conversations about why I'm wrong, basically, because there are so many opinions out there in the world, and maybe I am wrong. Not that I've ever been wrong before, but it is possible. If you enjoyed the discussion today, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm Kronos. Thanks for watching.